Hello and welcome to round 5 of Global Conversations with Dance Data Project. This is Women Behind the Stage. My name is Ellen Fitzgerald. I am the Communications Manager for Dance Data Project, here with Liza Eintema, our founder and president. I have the distinct pleasure to introduce Eleanor Wolfe, Director of the Costume Department at Miami City Ballet, and Caryn Wells, who is a theatrical milliner and has a storied history working in that space. So to start us off, would each of you just kind of tell us a little bit about your backgrounds and kind of where you got to where you are today?
I started sewing clothing for myself when I was 9 years old. And I, had the idea that, of course, I would be a fashion designer. And so when I was 17 and started college, I was taking art, I was a musician, I was doing all these things, I was making my own clothes, and a very, very astute advisor who was a musicologist said, you should be in theater. That has everything you like. And so he got me a job at the dinner theater in Sarasota, Florida, and I started working on costumes, and I just never stopped after that. And I made my way through college mostly by working in the costume shops, and I didn't graduate college till I was working in a costume shop at a small state university in New Paltz, New York. And I completed my undergraduate degree at age 45 after having a long professional career as a costumer, so including many years in New York City, most of which I worked for Barbara Matera Limited, which was in the same building as a very renowned building, 890 Broadway, where ABT has their studios. And that's where I met Caryn. and we mostly saw each other backstage at the Metropolitan Opera House. So that's my background. And I ended up at Miami City Ballet here in the last, what will be the last of my career. We'll see.
I was a costume design major in college and left college and started work with the Metropolitan Opera. I was very fortunate to have a mentor in a costume shop that I had worked at in summer theater get me an interview with the Met Opera. And so I did wardrobe with Met Opera and moved on from there to Broadway and Radio City Music Hall, and then eventually made my way to American Ballet Theatre. And I was the head of principal ladies wardrobe for American Ballet Theatre for a little over 18 years. And I left there about 7 years ago and started Caryn Wells Designs shortly after that. Mostly because after my daughter was born, I needed to get off the road and needed to be home and needed to be doing something. So this is a sort of a natural outlet for what I had been doing and being able to continue to do that, but not necessarily have to be quite as hands-on. So that's what I've been doing.
When you and I were talking last, I believe you were out of New York City, right? You're residing someplace else or work at the time that we spoke, I think. Is that right?
I live in Long Island. I live in the East End of Long Island.
Tell us a little bit about what working from home has been like, and are you doing bespoke commissions? Is it mostly for Broadway? Is it for opera? Is it mostly for ballet? And then I'd love to hear a little bit about, we talked about this before, which I thought was fascinating, the specifics of ballet, because I know stuff happens in theater, but I mean, there's a lot of head whipping and a lot of upside going on in ballet. We've heard some pretty wild stories from some other people. So that headgear's got to stay on, right?
It does. It's going to be, building for ballet is very different than building for almost anything else. With dancers, everything has to be light. It has to be well balanced. They have to put it on and forget about it. They have to look at it, know that they look gorgeous before they go on stage, and then forget entirely that they have it on their head. If what I've made occurs to anybody when they're in the middle of a performance, I haven't done my job. So, so the delicacy and the sparkle and all of that to me is important, but secondary. It needs to be structurally appropriate to be able to do whatever a dancer needs to do when they're on stage. And that varies. I mean, there are certain things you can build a really big headpiece because a dancer doesn't have a partner and she's not going upside down. And so you can have something that has a little bit more height or more depth to it if it's a solo, or if she's not working with a partner or doing particular choreography. But you have to be able to understand the choreography and understand what she needs to do in order to make a piece appropriate for a dancer.
Eleanor, talk a little bit about what you do every day, but also how you work with, how the costume designer works with the milliner. I suddenly realized these two artisans have to be talking to each other a lot.
Well, and I'll just say that Caryn is just, listening to her say those things, is just so well positioned from her career to move into making theatrical headwear, because she was there backstage watching the things fly off. We're trying to figure out how to put something on. And so for her to take her costume design background and move through the backstage wardrobe aspect and then back out front again is just great. And it's perfect. And it's what makes Caryn so good at what she does. But first of all, Liza, I'll have to clear up a misconception that I've gone through my whole life, because when I was 17, I wanted to be a fashion designer and decided against that. I became really a theatrical costumer. I'm a costumier. I'm not a costume designer. I make the clothes, and that's always been my focus. I've never liked the blank. I say I don't like the blank page. Like, give me a picture of something and I'll make it for you. And it can be an abstract picture and I can make it into a costume. And it can be a beautiful, some costume designers make illustrations that are really proportionally perfect, and you can almost measure it out and scale it up and make that. And others, put a couple of dots on a piece of paper and tell you it's organza, or don't tell you it's organza, and you have to figure that out. So my job is really making that illustration come to life on stage. And I don't find a lot of differences in whether I'm doing it for theater or ballet, but I did work in musical theater for a long time too, on Broadway, where, we were doing things that had to, look gorgeous this way, but had to do a whole, dance and be upside down and the same thing. So the costume shop I worked with in New York City, Barbara Matera Limited, she's Barbara Matera is a legend. And she started her career in ballet, moved into film and Broadway, and back into ballet in New York City. And so I was able to be around some of the best makers in the business for 17 years. Barbara was only alive for 10 of those years, but it was a great training ground right there in downtown New York City. So it's very different. Some people are very abstract and simplistic in their sketches, and some people are great artists. I mean, some people are like John Singer Sargent.
Are there spares and spares upon spares? I mean, you have people sweating into things, and I don't know, Ellen is a former professional dancer, what the tolerance for error is, how, whether everybody's pretty much the same size, and also, how fast do these costumes wear out? Is there certain fabric you can and cannot use? Are you, how do you build out the headpieces to last longer? How do you store them?
It really depends on the budget of the production, whether there are scads and scads of replacement costumes and duplicates. So sometimes there are many extras and sometimes there are just a few. Here at Miami City Ballet, we have a pretty good balance of money for our productions, and the idea that a lot of our girls are the same size. So we do have, but you always have extras, and and there are rules on Broadway that some things have to be replaced, and some costumes last 35 years. I think Don Quixote which is a production that we rented recently from American Ballet Theatre, which we were then unable to put up because it was because of the pandemic. That, I believe, was 35 years old. It might be even more than that. This ballet company is 35 years old. I made some of the costumes for that ABT production of Don Q when I was in New York City in the middle of that 35 years, not at the beginning of that 35 years. And so then they end up here. So some costumes last a long time. Stretch costumes tend to not last 35 years because the stretch gives out. So more, it's interesting. If you use fabrics that are traditional, have been around a long time, they last a long time. If you're using modern, more technological fabrics, spandex has a lifespan of its own, right? The elastic gives out. So silk rots, so there's lots and lots of variables, but sweat is a big one.
Do you have a protocol, like off the stage, put it in a hat box, close the hat box, hang up the costume, just so things stay better?
Yeah, that's a whole nother, as in I'm describing, I'm not a costume designer. I have a colleague here at Miami City Ballet who is the head of wardrobe. And so his job is to take the costumes that we've made here in the costume shop to the theater and take care of them there, get them on and off the dancers, and also take care of them after that. So definitely the way things hang, the way we make them, they might not be able to hang on a hanger. They might have to be supported in some other way. Tutus are usually hung upside down just to combat gravity, which is making it crushed like this. So when you store them upside down so they maintain a little more life. I also wanted to touch on something that surprised or that was interesting to me and different to me when I got here to Miami was when we do a new production. We did Firebird just before the pandemic. We've successfully mounted a brand new production of the Firebird, and we only do 9 performances here in the South Florida area. So our production, we want it to last for many years, but we're only doing nine performances. Now there are also probably 4 or 5 dress rehearsals. So around 15 performances. Then we're going to put it away for 3 to 4 to 5 years, and then we'll pull it out again. So it's different to me than making something for the Broadway stage and probably for ABT or New York City Ballet that do more performances. Broadway, you're making something, it's going to be used 8 shows a week over and over and over again, hopefully, right? That's the idea. Now, like Caryn said, secretly, if we're like, this isn't running, like, just get those tights out there. We'll worry about the duplicates later. But you never really know, right? I'm sure there are many things we thought were gonna not be successful that were. So,
do either of you have any projects or particular items that you've created that you look on with fondly?
I guess I have one that I'm sort of proudest of and was my favorite one to get out of my studio. Like, I desperately wanted this thing gone. And that was a piece that I made it was the Tsarina's headpiece, and for the national tour of Anastasia. And it was a dream piece to make. And I was so grateful when I was finished with it. It was it's huge and it's beautiful, but it's a piece I'm very proud of, and I'm also very happy is no longer in my life, and I can just look at pictures of it.
Tell us what went into making the piece, how long it took you.
It was a piece that the Broadway show is designed by Linda Cho. Was nominated for a Tony for costume design. And when they were getting ready to launch the tour, the national tour, they need to make duplicates of everything. And this is a piece that I had done other pieces for the Broadway show and was redoing those and put a bid in to do this larger Tsarina piece. And won the bid primarily because the initial piece, they were having a very hard time with maintenance on Broadway, and they were concerned because of the way that it was constructed, using very different methods than what I use. The way it was constructed, it was having to be sent out for repair about every 2 weeks. And you don't have that kind of luxury on the road. So since I had built a lot of stuff to tour, because working with American Ballet Theatre and building things for their productions, as well as other companies that needed to be able to have stuff that wouldn't necessarily need a lot of maintenance constantly, they decided to let me try to do this piece and see how it went. And I think my grand total finally in the end was about between 55 and 65 hours. I was finally able to get the weight of the piece down to under a pound. I think I finally weighed in at about, it was 13 ounces. So to go from almost 4 pounds to 13 ounces is pretty substantial. So yeah, I was very proud of that.
Well, yeah, I usually say I don't like the favorites question, and I'm glad that Caryn opted out of ballet too, because I really have a passion for watching dance. I was never a dancer, Ellen, but so I can't think of a favorite ballet. I'm sure that my favorite Broadway project was The Lion King, and I think it's because it's so different. It had so many different elements than a normal Broadway musical, although it managed to pack itself into that nice little container so it could be successful. But the use of ethnic clothing, and I was thinking about using the term ethnic, and I'm like, is that still a good term to use? I'm using it crudely probably, but a lot of the costumes for The Lion King were based on original pieces of clothing that Julie Taymor had seen, and a lot of them are rectangular. And that was a passion of mine in my youth, was to make all rectangular clothing, like just sarongs and wraps and cutting pieces like kimono. So in that way, Lion King fit that in, but it was also just so interesting. And there were so many different styles of costumes and approaches to things and that was also the first show that I was allowed as a member of the team at Barbara Matera Limited to be a draper, which is the person who actually conceives of the pattern and makes the decisions and leads a team to make these things. So that was my favorite show for many different reasons.
Caryn, on your website for Caryn Wells Designs, you mentioned that the dancers at ABT kind of encouraged you to kind of go off on your own and expand your business and helped you really perfect the designs. Can you talk a little bit about that collaboration and how their support has really impacted you?
I wouldn't have a business now without any of those women. I'd always had an interest in headpieces. I got a millinery degree from FIT just kind of because I was fascinated with millinery, but it wasn't ever anything that I did much with. It was just something that I enjoyed and I had interest in. When I started working at ABT, I really ended up doing a lot of repairs because ABT is a not-for-profit and you're on the road and you don't have the ability to send stuff back to Barbara Matera's or send stuff back to Woody Shelp or whoever at the time we had headpieces from to do maintenance. So that fell on
Bill
me.
Gallagher at Barbara Matera Limited, who made
Right.
a lot of headpieces. Exactly.
I mean, we didn't have that opportunity. So a lot of that sort of maintenance and repair, and then God forbid when a girl left a headpiece in her dance bag and left it at the hotel, like that kind of like that immediate sort of remaking of pieces ended up falling to me. And my dancers were very vocal about what worked and what did not work. Some comments were very nice and very helpful, and some comments were very harsh and very helpful. But once I kind of discovered what it was that they were looking for and really started, when I really listened to what they were saying and what they were asking for and what requirements they had that weren't necessarily getting fulfilled, and started building to that, not necessarily just building to what I thought looked good, or I thought would work. They were very supportive and very encouraging of me continuing to do that. And then a lot of them started, asking for things for gigs, or can you make me a headpiece for certain things. A lot of, pardon me, a lot of ballet theaters, older productions have sort of, principal dancers with some of the older productions have a little bit of leeway in how they do their hair, what they wear for headpieces. There's a little bit of artistic expression that's allowed to happen within what they're wearing within reason. And
right, it
for a
doesn't
lot
have to stick to the original design from the
Precisely.
original designer. Things morph and yeah.
Yeah, and
It's true at New York City Ballet too, that the principal dancers get their, there are things that are made just for them.
But yeah,
Right.
I mean, in the old days, ballerinas would bring their own costumes, right?
well, not necessarily just the old days anymore.
Oh, okay.
We've seen
Guest
that get in
artists.
trouble.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh,
guest
okay.
artists will show up. Doesn't matter what your production looks like. They're wearing their Kitri costume.
Is that so? Really? Wow. That's a fun fact. I didn't know that.
There are certain dancers who will, like Nina Ananiashvili,
Oh, she's naming things.
would always check. She would always check ahead of time to what a production looked like. She wanted pictures of what all of the Giselle costumes looked like, and she would have her own pieces made. Nina was actually a person that was one of the very first people who encouraged me to continue to do what I was doing, because she refused to wear any headpieces that ABT had. She said she would never wear headpieces that were made in the West. She hated them. They were too heavy. They didn't conform to her head. She hated them. And I will never forget the day she asked me to make her a black swan headpiece to match ABT's brand new production, which was in 2000, to match ABT's brand new production of Swan Lake. And she asked me to make a black swan headpiece for her. She put it on and she said, okay, officially, you are the only person in the West whose headpieces I am willing to wear. The only person. And I was like, that's not bad. But Nina really encouraged me to go out on my own. And Jillian Murphy was the very first person who ever bought anything from me, like who commissioned me to make a piece and then proceeded to wear it on the Met stage, which is something I will never forget. Never, ever.
Can either of you talk about, we'll start with Eleanor, kind of disaster moments when things don't go according to plan, something goes awry, kind of how do you keep a cool and level head during those situations?
I have worked backstage in some aspects of my life. I don't usually or often, but I think there is, I think maybe there is a good amount of training in backstage theatrical people that we need to remain calm, and not panic. And that usually helps to solve the situation. Sewing it up quickly, I mean, is always you can always do that, right? You can always get it done. But my favorite disaster story isn't related to backstage. It's related to producing costumes and having to. We would be making them in New York City, and the show is opening somewhere else. And right now, I can't remember where the production of. It was the second mounting of Disney's Aida. So the first one had already gone down in flames, and we were mounting it again with a second costume designer. And he is Bob Crowley, one of my favorite costume designers to work with, who is someone who does really a pretty simple sketch, but he's also very, very imaginative. So it's really fun to talk to him and then see what he wants from that sketch. And even though it's simple, you can really grow from that, really grow out of his sketch into something interesting. But we were, as often happens on making a big production, we were behind and we were running late. And I had one more costume to make for the Pharaoh, and it was his death costume, because there was a scene where he was dead already, but we were going to see him and he was mummified. So the costume was to wrap this person in mummy wrappings, as if they were a mummy. But the actors were all out of town by now, which I can't remember where out of town was. So I'm making it in New York City on a dress form, which is usually not a good idea to just fit it to a dress form. It's a stretch costume. I've got this unitard, and then I'm wrapping these stretch bandages around it. So it's all stretch, right? It's going to work. It's going to be great. And I make the whole thing and I ship it out, and Barbara Matera is out of town. Often I would be the one out of town, but now I'm sitting there trying to get this costume made. Not that I was sewing it myself either. That was just a hand. I had a team of people making this, but I was directing it, and I was send it off to Barbara and get a call back, a couple of days later once it's arrived, and they're going to have a fitting. And she said, well, it was beautiful. It was unwearable. We couldn't even get it on him. So luckily, they ended up realizing that scene was a ridiculous idea, and they cut the whole scene, so they didn't need the costume either. But that has never, I don't know how many years ago that was even. It was sometime in the late 90s. Sometime in the late 90s. And I just remember her saying, well, it was beautiful, but unwearable. So, which is not something you want to hear in the theater.
So Caryn, on that note, when we first started chatting, you were talking about being a dresser. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because it sounds like reading the room, beyond collaboration, reading the room, but as I said, almost a very, very intimate experience when somebody's getting ready to go on stage.
I'm not a performer, so I can't speak on it from that point of view, but to be the person that somebody sees, is the last person that somebody sees before they turn into someone else. That's a lot of responsibility, and you have to make sure that you are what they need. And sometimes, as you were saying, sometimes it's they need to have a lot of contact, and somebody needs to be laughing and joking and not thinking about what they have to do right up until the last moment. And some people want to know that if they turn 90 degrees to the right and raise their eyes, that you'll be there with a cup of water, and you have to be able to tell the difference. And it was a job that I really enjoyed. I did it on Broadway. I was a star dresser on Broadway for a long time. And I really enjoyed it with dancers. It's easy when you're sort of the wardrobe mistress for a touring company and you spend all your time with these people. It's easy to have a better idea of what people are looking for. It was always a little more challenging with guest artists coming in, but made it fun. And as a supervisor, trying to match up dancer personalities with dresser personalities that I was supervising. So who I was going to put, what dresser I was going to put with what dancer, was always sort of a interesting kind of beginning of the season.
You were kind of matchmaking, I think.
Yeah.
You really were. And you had
it's an excellent way to put it.
You had such wonderful things to say about some of your stars that you dressed, how kind they were and wonderful and everything else. Julie Andrews in particular, I think.
Yeah, I've been very fortunate with the people that I worked with. Eleanor knows too. She's worked with a lot of
I've worked with
a lot of people.
She's yeah.
Is it like a surgeon who is cutting somebody open for the first time when you're faced with an incredibly expensive piece? I don't know if you've done this on your own, of like irreplaceable fabric or close to irreplaceable, or you're on a time constraint to actually cut into it. Do you get the willies, or are you just like, you know exactly what you're doing?
Well, yes and yes. Yeah, we do a lot of samples, right? We make a mock-up of something, so we don't cut right into that really expensive fabric right away. We make sure we've got our pattern set before we cut into that really expensive fabric. But that is it's always a fear. You always want to know you have a couple of extra yards, even if it's really expensive fabric, so that you can like have some accident with the sleeve or something. But yeah, it's stressful. You're working with somebody else's money. You're getting paid. There's not, just like Caryn is saying, ABT didn't have money to go back and get things repaired. Well, we're being paid a certain amount to make something, so you only have a certain amount of hours to do it, and there's no guarantees. So it's more stressful than making costumes should be. It always has been. It's always been one of those surprising things that it's, so there's a lot of stress backstage.
Is anything ahead for either of you on the horizon? Any exciting projects coming up, or what are you looking forward to as theaters are opening back up, and hopefully Eleanor, the company, will be back in performance this fall? Just talk to us about what you're looking forward to.
I'm looking forward to not wearing these masks anymore that I handmade, but I was really proud to do that, really happy to do that. The whole costume industry came forward. I can, one of my, what I'm looking forward to combines with one of my favorite memories of working in New York City too, which is not working in New York City, but we are taking our Nutcracker to Kennedy Center. Yes, Thanksgiving week. Yay.
Are you going? Sorry. We can
Yes.
this. Sorry, are you going?
Yes, I should go, because we're opening our season with that at Kennedy Center, and we have to fit the children, and so that's one of my responsibilities. But the last time I was at the Kennedy Center backstage with a performance was ABT's Swan Lake, which opened was that in 2000? I think it was 2000.
Yeah.
Because I've got goosebumps, because that was the last full production that Barbara Matera was alive for. And we did Zach Brown's Swan Lake for American Ballet Theatre at Kennedy Center. So I'm super thrilled to be going back to Kennedy Center, super thrilled that we're going to have an audience in a theater. I mean, if we were all sick and tired of going to the theater every night, well, we're not sick and tired of it anymore. I'll go back.
One of the things I'm most excited about is just working again. I was fortunate during the pandemic to be able to, Colorado Ballet is doing a new Nutcracker, and was supposed to open last year, but they had managed to save the funds, and so we built it through the pandemic, which was great. It was lovely to be able to have some of that work.
For our friend, the costume designer, Holly Hines.
Yes.
Yes.
And Holly's always a joy to work with, but I'm excited about just being able to like go back and see theater and have work and that kind of stuff. But also one of my favorite, one of the biggest things that was sort of had put my career forward recently was Miami City Ballet's Nutcracker, and being able to work on that with the Toledos was probably one of the biggest projects I've ever worked on, and one of the most challenging, but absolutely one of the most fun. So I'm super, and I've never actually seen it.
Oh,
so
and I was not here when they were making that Nutcracker. That was
right.
That
you
was
joined shortly after, right?
The next year.
Yeah.
So it was the second year we put it up. So yeah. It's a beautiful production, costumes designed by Isabel Toledo, and sets by her husband, Ruben Toledo. And when I said it was Zach Brown's Swan Lake, I meant that was the costume designer, of course.
Yeah.
That's my perspective is who did the costume designs for that Broadway? I don't care about any of the rest of it.
Zach did the sets for that too.
Oh, thank you for saying that. Yeah.
Thank you both so much to Caryn Wells and Eleanor Wolfe for joining us this afternoon. And we're so thrilled to get to talk to you and hear about your craft and your art form, because it is a very important component of the dance that we don't often really talk about or get to dig into. So thank you for sharing your talents with us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Please.
It was great. Great to see you, Caryn.
It's good to
Okay.
see you too.